how sometimes things we say come back to not so much bite us, but sometimes they bite us, but how we have to eat our words sometimes. I can remember some years ago making a statement to anybody who would listen. I'll never buy a bottle of water. And now it's part and parcel of our lives, isn't it? I want to share a passage of scripture. It's in the Old Testament book of Exodus, chapter 3. These words, this has to do with God calling Moses and the burning bush and all of that story and how God got Moses' attention and all the things that happened. But I want us to look at part of this text that talks about how do we face an uncertain tomorrow. So beginning with verse 7 in chapter 3, these words. Moses already walked up to the bush and God's gotten his attention and now they're having a conversation. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, lots of indigenous folks who lived in that part of the world at that time. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. Let's pray together. Father, your written word is powerful, your living word even more so. Help us to find it, to live it, to be the people you want us to be. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. I don't need to tell you that life throws curveballs our way, that life many times can be very, very hard, very difficult, very hard to understand. Look around at the life you and I live in today, at the domestic terrorism, those activities in the street, the shootings, the virus that seems to, we just heard someone mention, a member of our community has contracted it. All those things that are going on, all the hatred and animosity of the upcoming election, and the things that are around you and me today, they all tell us that you and I are facing an uncertain tomorrow. Unlike much or most of the past, our security is not guaranteed. Our safety is not something we can take for granted. All you've got to do is look around and think to yourself, or say to yourself and to others around you, how in the world can this be happening? The longer I live, the more convinced I am that this mindset, this psychological warfare, all these things that are plaguing you and me has its roots in many places. But one of them is on the events of 9/11, 2001. Do you remember the shock that you felt when you saw those two buildings falling, when we saw the loss of life, when we thought, this is America. How can this be happening to us? Almost ever since that day, even over the next couple of Sundays, the churches were full. Pretty soon, we got back to our normal. How can we ever expect God's blessings if we don't pay more attention to God than we are? But that mindset of the fact that this is America and this nation is under attack, and how could it be? There are many, many other instances similar. I bet you can remember where you were on that day. I can remember to this day where I was in 1963 when JFK and John F. Kennedy, our president, was shot. And that was another mindset change. It just doesn't happen in America. We could read in our history books about Abraham Lincoln, but that was in 1865. None of us were alive then. But it happened. Folks who are older than me say they can remember to this day where they were on December 7th, 1941, when news came that the country of Japan had attacked our naval base at Pearl Harbor. So you see these mind things, these mindsets, these psychological events continue to remind us that we face an uncertain future. Daily you see in the news reports of riots and murder, of folks walking up to police cars and shooting deputies in the face. You see news about the pandemic. Supposedly now we're on the third wave of the increase. Maybe not, I don't know. We wonder about the economy. Is it good that the stock market's gone up? Well, yeah, if you're invested in it, and it means greater economic prosperity and more jobs for folks. I still don't understand how many of these folks who are unhappy with the rising market say that's only for rich folks. If you have a 401k or any kind of investment, you're in the stock market. So it behooves the majority of us who are fortunate enough to have some savings and investments to have a good market. But we wonder, when you see it go up and down like a roller coaster, look at what's going on in school. All the things that have happened and are continuing to happen. Daily, there are reminders. And it's an interesting thing in the coverage of news in our world that many times it's always something new every day, and there's no fault. Do you remember back not so long ago when there was 100 days of burning and rioting in Portland? Have you heard anything about that lately? I haven't. Does that mean it's stopped? Does that mean it's going on and we're not hearing? All of those things lead us to an uncertainty. The greatest tool the devil has is fear. The book of 1 John says, real love, God's love, casts out fear. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of truth. But that's what we're living in. That's life in general. Look at the schools. Do you remember back when we actually went to school? The things that were going on? Some 40-some, or let me see, more than 50 years ago when I went. The biggest problems were running in the hall, shirt tail out, chewing gum. If a teacher caught you chewing gum, two things usually happen. Number one, she'd hold out her hand, you had to spit it in there. I never quite got into that. But secondly, then you would hear the question, "Oh, we brought enough for everybody." Well, it used to be that just growing older, that acne and increased hormones were the biggest problems that students and teachers faced. Then it got to where there were shootings at Columbine and Sandy Hook, and college shootings, Virginia Tech and other places, and then the virus came along and shut down school, and even churches are declining. I don't need to tell you what's happened to our parish, the other parishes all around. I don't know if people just don't believe or don't care or what, but this is the uncertain life. I'll say all those things to say as illustrations that this is an uncertain life. Well, in many, many ways, our friend Moses was in the same dilemma. Like those of us in the U.S. for a period of time, he had it made. Life was safe. Life was predictable. There were no real issues that bothered Moses other than maybe his wife Zipporah cooked rabbit stew instead of lamb stew. We don't know. But Moses had things in order. He had a wife, he had a family, he had a job, even if he was working for Jethro, his father-in-law, tending the sheep on the backside of the lower 40. Life was settled and safe. For the first time since Moses, the miracle of even growing up at all, the miracle of being found by Pharaoh's daughter, the miracle of growing up in Pharaoh's palace, but then the downside of his life when he killed someone and had to escape from Egypt. For the first time since all of those things had happened, Moses was settled and happy. You might be able to say something like that about yourself. That not so long ago, things were kind of starting to level out. There were still some ups and downs, but the dust was beginning to settle, and you were beginning to feel like you had a handle on things, a hold on what to do. Have you ever noticed, friends, that it is often in those times of our lives when God acts? That's what happened with Moses. Moses was settled. He had the wife, the family, all those things I mentioned. He had the job, and he was content until all of a sudden God intervened. Go back to the first part of Exodus chapter 3, and you read the story about the burning bush. Moses is out there with the sheep, And he's looking around and he says, oh, there's a bush. It's on fire, but it's not burned up. It's blazing, but it's not consumed. I think I'll mosey over there and just check it out. And that's when God spoke to him. God intervened in that settled life of Moses. Now, I'm not saying God caused all these problems we're dealing with now, but God can use these to intervene in our lives to make us wake up. Scriptures say that God can make something good out of something bad. So Moses eases over to the burning bush, and to his surprise, God tells him what he's going to do. Beginning with verse 7 of chapter 3, what I read, God says, let me tell you something, Moses, I've heard the cries of my people, and it's breaking my heart, and I've got a plan, and this is great, and it's going to work out. And Moses was ecstatic. He said, well, good, God, it's time, you need to do these things. And then all of a sudden God said, and oh, by the way, it's you. Moses was not so happy after that. He tried every which way he could to get out of it. Every which way I've tried to get out of things. Maybe every which way you try to get out of things sometimes. Moses says, I can't go, I stutter. That's in another place. And I can't talk to these people. And God says, well, I'll send Aaron. He's been to the Dale Carnegie course. And he's got the gift of gab. He gets to ease on him. Moses, before that, he says, well, who am I? I don't have any credentials or any pedigree. God says, well, here's a sign. When you get through that, all you're going to be right back here. And then Moses says, well, what am I going to, how am I going to do all this? They know I've killed somebody. You can read that in chapter 2, around verse 14. Moses saw an Egyptian guard, taskmaster, slave driver, beating an Israelite, and he killed him. He hid the body in the sand, and he thought, no sweat. We'll go back and read that story, and you'll see where folks say to Moses, well, if you get mad at us, you're going to kill us like the Egyptian did. And so Moses knows his secret is out. Tells us this, be sure your sins will find you out. Scriptures are clear about that. But if Moses tried to go back to Egypt, would he be killed? Moses had the same question that you and I have today. How do we face an uncertain tomorrow? Two ways. First of all, Moses could and did face uncertainty because he, like us, be assured God is with him. Verse 11 and verse 12. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. There's a lot of difference between I will be with you and, well, let me see what I can do, or I will be with you and maybe, or I will be with you, let me check it out, or I will be with you, let me see what else I got going on at that time. You and I are good about that in our schedules. God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it's I who sent you. You will come back and worship on this mountain. That's a legitimate question, friends, that Moses had. Who am I? You and I have often asked that question. We're tapped to lead a Sunday school class. We're tapped to do a job. We're tapped to take a job. We're tapped for all kinds of things, and we think, I'm not sure I'm qualified. That, again, is a tool of the enemy to try to beat us down. You're no good. You don't have the skills. You don't have the talent. You don't have the experience. Or you're old so-and-so, and you sinned. You've done something to somebody. Maybe you haven't killed somebody, but you remember back when you were 8 years old and you took a pencil out of a display box at Rose's? You're no good. And so those are legitimate questions that Moses is asking that you and I can ask. But God had a bigger answer to Moses' big question. He says in verse 12, I will be with you. Those are some of the greatest, strongest, most important words you'll ever hear. The book of Matthew ends with Jesus saying, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, even to the end of time. The belief, the fact, the trust that God can be with us and is with us is all throughout the Scriptures. Book of Hebrews in chapter 13, verse 5, God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You can be with someone and they're not with you. You can be with someone and they do forsake you. You can be next to someone and they don't have your back or take care of you. We can say like the psalmist says in Psalm 118, Lord is with me. Whom shall I fear? What can man do to me? So we, like Moses, can face the uncertain tomorrow, first of all, because God is Secondly, Moses also could face this uncertain future because he, like us, was assured God is personal. Verse 13, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? How do we know you know him? Who do you think you are? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me. Well, if you want to believe, I don't mean like you may or may not believe, in order to believe that something is really personal, try something like this. We all know the words of the 23rd Psalm. We can rattle it off in our Lord and show us all. The other day I looked up something with that verse, those verses. Try saying it and thinking it this way sometime. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Go all the way through that and notice where I, me, or mine. 16 times in those few verses, you will find enough evidence that it's personal. Well, Moses was still not convinced, even though God is telling him. And so he asks the question in verse 13. If they say, who sent you? What am I supposed to say? Now, God gave him the reply in verse 14, I am who I am. Now, those words themselves and our worldview, our environment, our Western way of looking at things, sometimes it is very, very hard for us to understand. It's odd to us that Moses would ask God his name. We need to understand something about the Scriptures. The day and age of the Scriptures, your biblical name defined who you were. Your biblical name defined your ministry. Your biblical name defined your life. It wasn't just, well, let's name this little girl Mary. It wasn't, well, this little guy's going to be, John Jr. or whatever. There was a reason. Our Native Americans, our Indians, had a closer concept of this than you and I did. That's why so many Indian babies were named, Chief Little Standing Bear or something, or Mighty Hunter or whatever. It defined your very essence. It was not just a name or a word or something that you were called. It meant something in their lives. And so what Moses is really doing is checking to see if God can deliver on his promise. Well, okay, you say that, but how do I know? Well, how did God prove that to him? What did God do? God stamped his name on his promise. In verse 15, God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered, generation to generation. Well, in Hebrew, the words I am are pronounced Yahweh. And when we talk about Yahweh, it means I am. In case you're wondering, it was the folks bringing in the boxes for Samaritan's Purse, so we're good. Yahweh in Hebrew is what we read in English as I am. And based on the promise of God, the best working definition we can have of Yahweh is this. God is saying, I will always be what I have been. Well, in verse 15, God mentions Abraham and Isaac and Jacob to remind Moses and the Israelites, and you and me, that just as he delivered in the past to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, he hears us today and will do the same. You and I live in an unsettled time, perhaps as much as anything else. The two things that are paramount on our mind are the virus and the election. We have a part to play in all of those. Stay safe. Stay scattered as you can. Wear the mask. Wash your hands. All those things we've heard. Stay safe. We have a part to play in that. We have a part to play in our nation's future as well, however. In the election, how do we do that? Stay awake, read, pay attention. Look at the platforms of the two parties. And if you want real understanding, hold them both up beside God's platform, beside God's laws, beside God's decrees, and God's positions, and read the platforms that the parties have on the issues of today, on abortion, on same-sex marriage, on religious freedom, on liberty, on the makeup of the family. And read the things, for instance, that the organizations that align themselves with some of these, the group Black Lives Matter. There's no one in this room or no one with any sense who would not say that the lives of black people matter, like my life and your life, and the lives of the Native Americans, the lives of the Asian folks, the lives of every person, every human being's life matters. But the organization, Black Lives Matter, read their platform, read what they stand for, read where they say they are interested in tearing down the Western concept of family. My friends, that is not a Western concept of family. God says that a man shall leave his mother and father and unite with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That is a God point of view. So lay these platforms up against what God says and take a peek. Look at the things that are going on with religious freedom and religious liberty. Are schools going to be denied the chance to have, or churches going to be denied a chance to have religious schools and to do their teachings? Are you and I as individuals going to be forced into things that we don't believe in? You may have heard the story about the baker in Oregon who was forced by state law to make a cake for a same-sex couple and violated her religious liberty, her beliefs, and she chose not to and wound up in court over that. Is that where we're headed? We need to pay attention. We have a part to play, and we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to what the two platforms are talking about. Is there going to come a day and age in which churches are outlawed, the crosses come down off the steeples, and the gospel is declared hate speech? Many folks would define that as hate speech. I read something the other day I want to share with you. It's just about the folks who would be president or vice president on the Democratic platform, a committee, a party. They're talking about churches and religious liberty and freedom. The lady who would be vice president had this to say about faith and church and preachers. American churches, she said, are propaganda centers for intolerant, homophobic, xenophobic vitriol. In other words, hatred. And she went on to say, and I found this particular interesting because she's describing me now, that American pastors are, and I quote, knuckle-dragging, like a gorilla, knuckle-dragging disseminators of intolerance and enemies of social justice. The man who would be president made a statement not so long ago. I read this to you word for word. Those who hold to traditional views and intolerant Christian beliefs, and you need to understand what the word intolerant here means. Anything that violates what the progressive left wants to make the law of the land. And we are therefore intolerant if we don't agree with everything they say is okay. Again, hold that platform up against what God says. The man who will be president went on to say, those who hold to traditional views and intolerant Christian beliefs are dregs of society. You get that? In his mind, the traditional Christian view is lower than a snake's belly. So we have a part to play for our health, for the welfare of our nation, for our future generations. Pay attention. Be involved. Be vigilant. Edmund Burke in the 1700s, an English philosopher, member of the Parliament, is credited with this statement that all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Now I know we may be reluctant to get out, and we don't need to get out in silly, stupid ways, but we need to get out in the right way. Speak out for what's right, my friends. Share your witness. And remember this, it really doesn't matter what you and I think about what the Bible says. It really doesn't matter about those things. It doesn't matter what you and I think at all. The Bible is truth, whether you and I believe it or not. And you may have seen a bumper sticker through the years that say, God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. Wrong answer. God said it, and that settles it, whether I believe it or not. But friends, do all you can. Moses did all he could. He had his questions. We have questions. We need to ask questions. We need to pay attention. And I say again, hold those platforms up side by side with what the book says about those social questions, about religious liberty, about abortion, about freedom of speech, about the breakdown of the nuclear family that God created, and see where you land. Do all you can, but above all, as you've done that, ultimately, trust the Lord. How do we face an uncertain future? How do we face an uncertain tomorrow? Know this, God is already in tomorrow. We can find our place there as well. The song tells us, I have decided to follow Jesus. I hope you have. I hope you recommit your following. Page, I'll get some more light up here one day. 305. I invite you to follow Jesus as you are led to do that. And together, you and I can face an uncertain tomorrow, the same way Moses had. Because God is with us, and because God is personal. Is he with you? Is he personal to you? Make sure he is. And decide